In this lesson, we're going to cover the upgrade process and what the upgrade options are. Ideally, you would have a brand new environment and you would just be deploying new Windows Server 2012 installations. The reality is you will have existing servers out there. They may be running Windows Server 2008, Windows Server 2008 R2, or maybe even an earlier operating system. When you look to deploy and basically replace an existing operating system, you really have two options. You can do an in-place upgrade, so it's going to take the existing operating system and really upgrade it to Windows Server 2012, maintaining configurations such as the machine name, IP address, the applications that are installed on it. Or you can do basically a migration. So migration is we create a new operating system instance and then use migration tools to move the application and services over from the old OS to the new operating system. Now, an in-place upgrade is supported from Windows Server 2008 SP2 and Windows Server 2008 R2 SP1. So if you're running one of those operating systems, you can do an in-place upgrade to Windows Server 2012. But there are some caveats. It must be the same architecture, i.e. Windows Server 2012 is only 64-bit. So you must be upgrading from the 64-bit version of Windows Server 2008. There isn't a 32-bit version of Windows Server 2008 R2, it's 64-bit only. But for Windows Server 2008, there was both a 32 and a 64-bit OS. So if you want to do an in-place upgrade from Windows Server 2008, it must be a 64-bit deployment. You can also only upgrade to a same or higher level of the operating system. For example, if I was currently running Windows Server 2008 R2 Data Center, I could not upgrade to Windows Server 2012 Standard. I could only upgrade to Windows Server 2012 Data Center. But if I was running Windows Server 2008 R2 Standard or Enterprise, I have the choice of upgrading to Standard or Data Center. Now you will notice I did say Enterprise, as is shown in this chart. The reason is there is no Enterprise edition in Windows Server 2012. And so it's basically treated as a standard edition, which is why I can go from 2008 R2 Enterprise to Windows 2012 Standard. And in fact, if you had licensing, your Windows Server 2008 R2 Enterprise licenses were converted into Windows Server 2012 Standard licenses. You got two standards for each Enterprise license you had. So I can upgrade to the same architecture, and I can upgrade to the same or greater operating system. I cannot upgrade between configuration levels. So for example, if my server is currently what was a full installation or server with a GUI in 2012 terms, I could not upgrade to a server core installation. Likewise, if I'm currently running server core under 2008 R2, I have to upgrade to the server core version of Windows 2012. Now, once I've completed the upgrade to 2012, I could then either add the graphical interface if I was upgrading to server core, or if I had to upgrade to server with a GUI because it was currently a full installation, I could then remove the GUI. But I cannot make that change during the upgrade process. I have to upgrade to the same configuration level. So the actual process is fairly simple. I run the setup. I say install now. It's going to copy some temporary files. Now, one thing I do want to point out, we've already talked about I can do a fresh OS installation and then migrate services. Maybe I reinstall the application and I can copy over its data state or copy over other configuration files or point to the same database. Well, I can do that in-place upgrade. Just because the operating system supports an in-place upgrade does not mean the applications installed on it support an in-place upgrade. So you would actually need to check what are the applications running on the OS and do they support an in-place upgrade. Now, the upgrade process does do some checks, but it's not necessarily definitive. You should always double check with your application vendors. The actual process can do a check if there's any updates it should download, or for now, I'm just going to skip that for time. Notice I can select which version I want to upgrade to. So for this, I would have to select server with a GUI. This is an Enterprise edition, so I could go Standard 2012 or Data Center. Remembering, of course, if this was a Data Center deployment 2008 R2, I could not go to Standard. But notice if I try and do a server core installation, it's going to go through and do the checks. I accept the EULA. I'm going to say do an upgrade, and that's going to fail. If I run it again, but this time actually select the server with a GUI, the upgrade process would complete with no problem. So again, I have to upgrade to the same configuration level. Once I've completed my installation, then I can just go and change it. Generally, I actually prefer doing a clean installation. I generally would recommend against doing in-place upgrades. It's much better to perform a clean installation of the operating system, then migrate your data, migrate your settings, reinstall applications, etc. It gives you a cleaner experience. It makes sure it's optimized for that operating system. So again, here I can actually go through, say no thanks. This time, select the right version. And again, I'll accept the EULA. And then it's going to go and it's going to run some checks, and then it will give me a compatibility report. It will actually tell me if there's issues. It might give me some warning, but this isn't going to stop you. This is making you check, do the applications definitely work on this OS? Check these devices. That's just part of the integration services of Hyper-V. That will get upgraded anyway. And then you'll be done. Once this is completed, you will then be running Windows 2012 with all your settings, machine name, IP address, applications in place. Now there is an exception where you can't do an in-place upgrade even from 2008 R2, as if it's part of a cluster. I cannot upgrade members of a cluster to a newer operating system because you cannot mix different OS versions within a failover cluster. So if today I have a 2008 R2 cluster with 8 nodes in it, I cannot individually upgrade one at a time, one of them to 2012 and the next to 2012. It's called a rolling upgrade, and you cannot do that. So if you want to upgrade a cluster to Windows Server 2012, basically you need to take some nodes out of the cluster, create a new cluster by reinstalling the operating system and then creating a new cluster. And then there's cluster migration wizards that will take services from the old cluster and migrate it into the new cluster.